Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are here to give our review on the 1989 supernatural comedy film sequel, Ghostbusters 2, directed once again by Alden Reitman with exactly the same cast. In the lead up to Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is 1 week away as of recording, I believe.
Yeah, 1 week tomorrow.
Recording 1 week away as when this goes up. We're going through all the Ghostbusters films. Well, the ones that matter anyway. We're not touching 2016 with a barge pole. We do have a review for that and reactions and stuff. So if you are curious about that, go and watch that. But yeah, we're diving into Ghostbusters 2. Some of us have seen this for the first time. Some of this have kind of rediscovered it after a few years. And our opinions may have changed on it. I think this is going to be a very varied and quite an interesting discussion on this film, which we haven't had on the channel before. So this is going to be a first. So I'm very curious. But before we dive into it, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So comment your thoughts on Ghostbusters 2. This is the one a lot of people, I think, have differing opinions on. So very curious to see what you think of this compared to the original. Do you love it? Do you dislike it? Do you not care for it? Let us know. And, of course, hit that subscribe button. We've got one more Ghostbusters film to do. It's going to be a big one. A lot of people are talking about it already. I think it's going to be a potential sleeper hit. But we'll find out in the next couple of weeks. So do subscribe and we'll be up for Ghostbusters Afterlife. That'll be a week from today that goes up on the channel, Monday, the 22nd of November. If you are new to the channel or you don't know what we do, of course, we're a film channel. We've got reviews, discussions, all that kind of stuff. And we tend to announce everything on social media because at the time of this video going up, there's a lot happening. And the best way to find out what is coming up is getting us on our socials. Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinema_savvy, and we have a link to TeePublic in that description below. But of course, joining us tonight, we have Dave again, following on from our Ghostbusters 1 review. Very excited to get you back on. And we're going to hand over to you again to put you on the spot. Do you have memories with this film maybe coming out a bit clearer than the first one, perhaps?
Yeah, it was such a long time because it was like a 5-year gap between these films being released, which is kind of helps for the beginning of the movie, I think, quite well for that. It kind of works to what's happening. But I don't think, again, it's not what I saw in the pictures, even though it came out 89, so I was 10. So I was probably just around about the right age for it. So I didn't see that. It was, again, another video release when it came out. But yeah, it's I've had probably since I saw this at the weekend before we did this review, and I'd not seen this film in a good 4 or 5 years since I've actually watched it myself, and I had a much different experience than I thought I was going to have. But yeah, so I just remember seeing it on video a long time ago when it came out.
I mean, I kind of gave my spiel in like the last review, but I had a double VHS combi of Ghostbusters 1 and 2 on video, and at the time I just watched the two interchangeably, and I remember distinctly loving Ghostbusters 2. I don't know which one I watched the most amount of times. I think it pretty much was level pegging all the way through. But there were loads of moments that still stuck with me with Ghostbusters 2 that kind of like burned their way into my mind for positive reasons. A lot of it was, and I kind of mentioned this with Ghostbusters 1, was some of the ghosts, with some of the scares. It really kind of got me as a kid, and I guess a lot of those scenes now are kind of my favorite scenes, so I'll save it for the section where we talk about that. And I haven't, Christ, I don't even know the last time that I watched Ghostbusters 2. Ghostbusters 1 I put on every other year or so. It's very distinct in my mind, but Ghostbusters 2, as I've got older, never really went back to until before this review. And now I'm like officially caught up with it again. And I have had a differing opinion on this film from what I remember. I don't think this film is as awful as people say. I don't think it's, like a 0 out of 10 or anything like that. I don't think it's absolute trash. But I think compared to the first one, it's a comparative kind of thing. It is definitely a lot more lackluster, I found this second time round, for various reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into in the review. But as a kind of immediate statement, yeah, I was a bit underwhelmed watching Ghostbusters 2 again, I must admit.
I mean, I've never seen it until yesterday, pre-recording this. So it's one of those films where I mentioned that I've seen a lot of people discuss this online. Some people love it, some hate it, and I was always not curious, but because I didn't enjoy that first one, I just never watched the second one because I knew people didn't like the second one as much. I was like, if I don't like the first, do I have a chance? Maybe that would have been the opposite way. Who'd have ever known? But yeah, I kind of not intentionally. It wasn't like I've got no intention of ever watching this. It was just like, after watching the first one, okay, I'm not going to see this now. I'm sure one day I'll do them all again, and obviously that has happened. So it's one of them where I was curious going. I knew nothing about this one going. I think you guys obviously told me that it's got the guy from Mr. Bean in it, who we'll talk about later on, and Obviously, I assumed the 4 Ghostbusters, of course, but I didn't know Sigourney Weaver was back. I didn't know what the ghosts were, what the plot was. I knew nothing. Obviously, the first film, there's so much iconography. You knew about the Marshmallow Man. You knew about so many things. Whereas this one, I was getting took by surprise, I guess you can say, which may also show how little people talk about it. If I don't know anything about a 30-plus-year-old film, not to sound horrible, but I would have struggled watching this on a double bill as originally planned at the cinema that night. So I'm gonna thank my friends for bailing on that, because I think honestly that would have been. And I think one of the reasons one of them bailed was probably because it was doing both films as well. I'm convinced that would be why. But yeah, my initial thoughts for this was about a third of the way through. I was like, wow, people dislike this. I'm having a really good time. And then it went. As soon as it got as soon as the montage came in, I was like, okay, this is a bit quick to have all this. But yeah, it's a curious one. But I mean, we'll get into the character, but I think there's definitely some plot lines that work better than the first one. I wouldn't say it's better than the first one straight away, though. That's my initial thought.
Oh my god, in like a shocking twist of events, am I going to be the most negative Nancy on the review tonight for Ghostbusters 2? I never thought this would happen. I mean, the plot for Ghostbusters 2, I mean, it's basically the first film again, but the discovery of a massive river of ectoplasm and a resurgence of spectral activity allows the staff of Ghostbusters to revive the business. This was kind of the thing that struck me the most, and I've read a bit into the behind the scenes as well. This film was kind of troubled from the start, really. A lot of kind of dead ends and avenues and everything, and I mentioned last week the first film had a very quick turnaround. I think it had like a little over a year or something like that to get everything done, and the effects were down to the wire. They had even less time with this film. It felt like the story wasn't quite there from the off. It went through multiple rewrites, even as they were filming. Things were being built for the film because ideas hadn't been finalized. And yeah, it just feels kind of all over the place. And I think mostly it was the fact that the cast were very hesitant to come back, especially Bill Murray. Hence the 5-year gap between the films. So I think Bill Murray did a film, I think it was in 1984 as well. I think it was called The Razor's Edge, which was like a personal project of his, which like completely bombed. And after that, he kind of took a leave of absence from acting for a long while, came back with Scrooged in 1988. And I think through various negotiations of salaries, not just for Bill Murray, but for all of them, they agreed to return. I think they got like a big percentage off the back end or something like that. But I think inherently the problem with this is that 5-year gap. I think a lot of the momentum was just kind of gone with Ghostbusters. It was done on a budget of like between 30 and 40 mil, and it did make 215 back, but the studio very much saw that as a loss and like a critical and commercial failure, especially because at the time Ghostbusters was like the highest grossing comedy film of all time. They were expecting massively high numbers, but again, 1989, and we were kind of having this chat before we went live. 1989 for films, especially around that time, was very, very packed. A lot of sequels, a lot of big films. You had Indiana Jones Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2, Karate Kid Part 2, and Dave, as you mentioned before we went live, a little film called Batman, which was massive and definitely sort of like took the limelight away from Ghostbusters 2. But I think, especially if you're doing a comedy sequel and with kind of how quick lightning struck with that first Ghostbusters film, they needed to follow that up with a sequel within like 2 years, I would say 3 at the absolute most. I think 5 was a bit too much. And also it's weird that at the end of that first film, they're kind of, lauded as superheroes, the team's back together. And then your next film, you start it where they've all gone their separate ways. Relationships have, floundered and broken up, and they've got to get the team back together again. And it felt like it was just a way to basically recreate the formula of the first one. The plot, there are so many plot points and moments in this film that feel directly riffed off from the first one. It doesn't feel original in and of itself. And I think all those things combined, because you don't notice that stuff as a kid, you're just watching like a fun Ghostbusters film, but watching it now, there were moments in this film I was like, oh my God, it's exactly the same as the first film. We've got to kind of reset the relationship of Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver, because we've got to have that kind of flirtatious back and forth and that romantic element to it. We've got that giant sort of like encircling cloud in the sky, which is kind of like the Zool thing. We repeat that. There's the montage in the middle of the film. So many plot points are just kind of rehashed. And that's what it doesn't feel original to me. It didn't feel like it had that same spark behind the writing or direction, I guess.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because when it kicked off with the dramatic endgame 5 years later title card, I was like, okay. And the bits I was really enjoying kind of ties into what a lot of you said. I love this concept that not that they're myths, but these guys are con men. They screwed everyone over. They were this, they were that. They're like laughed upon. They lost the company. They got sued loads. I was like, wow, this is really dark for 1989, but I'll take it. And it's a really interesting thing to do with them, given that I know we spoke about it a little bit, but the first one's very much a political commentary at the time they spoke about with what's happening in New York. And I was like, that's a really interesting way of them to carry it on, that they'd all essentially gone their own ways over these years, but were still friends at the core of it. And I was really enjoying that sort of subplot. And then you had the whole Bill Murray stuff, where the one thing I'm going to say, the Squirrely Beaver stuff, we'll get to a character, but it's just, in 5 years, she's like, oh yeah, I was with Bill Murray, I broke up with Bill Murray, I got married, I got engaged, and then I ended. I was like, it's a lot of life for 5 years. The only thing I'll say about that, but it was one of them where I think the story got really interesting, but the moment in which the court case scene happened, and that's where I struggled, because after that part, to me, it just went straight back to 1984 Ghostbusters, and it was like, here's another montage thing, and it's really interesting, because I'd say it's quite brave what they did, that sort of darker story in the late 80s that didn't really get done with the sequels back then. And I don't know if there were many comedy sequels back then. We don't get many at all, I guess, in absolute truth, but normally there's big time jumps between them all. But obviously I know Beverly Hills Cop would have been massive at the time, but it's one of those where I thought it was a really smart way to bring them back into the fold. But I just think after that point, maybe is it me being a bit cynical, being a bit older, that the end of the day they're still there to bust ghosts and whatnot, but I just thought that it sort of drops off when the plot went a bit more familiar.
The familiarity is absolutely laced through it. Like Chris just mentioned, all those different points where you go, that's from the last movie. I mean, you get to the point at the end of the movie where there's a big giant character walking through New York again. So literally they thought, we need another Stay Puft to finish this movie. We'll get something different, but it's the same thing, a giant character walking through New York. I like the 5-year time jump, just like George just said there. I think it works really well. These guys saved New York, and now it's Ray and Winston trying to keep that the actual term of Ghostbusters alive still by doing parties for awful children. The one who calls them lies and dicks is Ivan Reitman, the director of Ghostbusters Afterlife. But it's so I think it's a really nice juxtapose of where they were to see how far they've fallen in just that amount of time. So I think the 5-year gap helps, especially if you kind of, not so much now, but if you kind of were there at the time, that 5-year difference in the movie getting made, you can kind of see, all right, well, they failed in what their business was, it's gone away, and now they're just living their lives. I think it really picks up from the court scene. I really enjoy that, getting back to the Ghostbusters, the awesome Do Ray Egon line from when they get in there. Just think it's just such an amazing delivery from Howard Ramis. But I really like that. The movie for me, I had a completely different experience. I went into this, I watched a double bill on Saturday night, just gone, watched them both back to back. And I really didn't expect to enjoy this movie as much as I did, but I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. And from that scene, and it's 101 minutes, I think, 104 minutes. So it's a really, really, it's not a long movie by any standards. It's almost 90 minutes dead and you're done. Obviously, by the time you credits and things on it, it probably is around about not far over your 90 minutes. So it's a very quick movie to watch. You're like, oh, it's over, but it does kind of blink. It kind of hits all these beats. And when they're back together, this is what's happening. This is the ghost. This is the bad guy. Now we've busted them. Now we're finished. It's a very, very quick and jumps through really fast.
As much as I'm kind of like in the middle on the 5-year time jump thing, I do think a lot of the interesting aspects of the film do take place in that first bit and seeing where all these characters are now. You've got you said Ray and Winston, and for, like, my brain thought, did you say Ray Winston? I was like...
Right, kids, I'm telling you what you're gonna do. Off out of my party.
It kind of just for a few seconds, it kind of threw me. My mind was like,
I was like, have I missed the wrong cameo?
But yeah, I like that. They're kind of working birthday parties, and I will say, like, the kids are all screaming for He-Man. I don't know if He-Man was still big in 1989. I feel like that was sort of, would it have still been popular towards the 90s? I don't know. I thought it was like middle of the 80s, maybe.
The real Ghostbusters cartoon was absolutely massive at 1989. It was probably at its peak of being watched at that point as well. But I guess obviously you can't have that when the story you want to tell. But yeah, again, I think He-Man would have been a thing of an older generation even by that point.
Yeah. No, clearly older writers writing for kids, what was
Yeah.
popular for them. I don't know. But you've got them working that. I do think it's a little bit strange in the neighborhood. The Ghostbusters theme is in universe now. I do think that's
Yeah.
slightly weird that they're singing along to it, but they've got to get that
I think it
popular song in there
works.
again somehow, haven't they? I like that, Ray's working in a cult bookstore. You got Egon doing his thing. I actually think Egon gets some of the best lines in this film. You mentioned that Do Ray Egon line, and that smirk that he pulls afterwards. I just wish I could capture that. It's so great. And then Bill Murray's character doing what he does best on that TV show, which is brilliant, with like the kooky weirdos banging on about aliens and the end of the world, included. And I never remember the actor's name. He always plays a dad in everything. He's like the dad in Small Soldiers. He's the dad in Transformers, the first three. But he's got hair. He looks. We had this conversation earlier, George, and you saying like he looks exactly the same, but he's got hair because it's the 80s. So it was great to see him there as well.
It came on screen, and I was like, "Is that Shia LaBeouf's dad?"
All you did
not
was
not
send me
real
a
dad,
picture.
but
I was like,
character.
yes, it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I
you
was
got it.
like, because I've never known his name. I was like, all I could think was the poor stroke from Transformers 1.
Yeah.
And it was like, I sort of phased out of what was going on. I was talking about the end of the world, but it was like, he looks the same.
I know.
He hasn't changed. And then it kind of really hit me that there's an 18 years gap between Ghostbusters 2 and Transformers 1.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on a 14-year gap at the moment, and that hit me in another level.
Yeah.
But I thought it was great, and obviously he's not in it long. After you mentioned it, I checked out his wiki. It was like one of his first ever roles and stuff. But
Right.
I loved all that weird stuff. Like, okay, what would you do with Bill Murray's character? That's put him on a show with the weirdos essentially, and they play that up so well. But then it's the beautiful timing that it almost did happen on New Year's Eve, and that he was right all along. I guess you could.
Oh yeah.
It was It was one of them I really enjoyed, but like you said, seeing where they all are in those different parts has been interesting. And we'll speak about Ghostbusters Afterlife at the end of this, but this is maybe more like what Afterlife could be than I thought, which gave me a little bit of intrigue for the film in a few weeks. But obviously, we'll discuss that when we get to it. But yeah, the Bill Murray stuff, you can tell that their careers have sort of blossomed between the films. That I mentioned Bill Murray at the time, but the reputation of the first film, how big that was at the time, the popularity of it, putting the song in the universe, I think that's when the song's big enough to get away with putting it in the universe. Like I think James Bond did it in Octopussy, and it was a bit cheesy. People love it, people hate it, but I think Ghostbusters is one that you can get away with it. I think very few films you can do that, but that was one of them that earned it, I think.
I do think this one as well. I know you mentioned it felt quite dark in some places. I'd actually say the opposite. I actually find this one a lot more family friendly and a lot more kiddie. Not to say that there aren't some scares in there, as I mentioned. Like there were some things that must have traumatized me enough to like burn their way into my memory for all of these decades on that I still remember. But I don't know if the cartoon had a big impact with that. You mentioned like the real Ghostbusters was massive. I think they even, with some of the new tech in this, I know certainly with the car, they had to treat it like that had actually taken place, like it was in canon with the cartoon series. I think that's why they bring Slimer back as well, because he was popular in the cartoon. And I think it's actually the reason that the new car in the film isn't called like the Ectomobile 2, because I think in the cartoon series the Ecto 2 was like a helicopter or something they had in that, so that's why it's called the Ecto 1A, I think it's called in this film. So I think that did greatly influence this film and the popularity from that. And not to say like it's overly kiddie, but I do think you've got Oscar in there, right? And it's the baby and that kind of angle to it, and it feels like it's much more of a family unit. You've got this kind of like paternal side to Peter Venkman's character. And I guess you could argue there is more of an arc there for his character. He was kind of the rock star in the first film, and in this one, he kind of has to step up to the plate a little bit more. He's more protective and that surrogate father kind of figure to Oscar. But I don't know, the baby stuff in the film, it kind of sidelines so much of the film for me, and there's so much of a focus on it. It does change the dynamic, and I don't know if that kind of makes it feel more like a family film and slightly more kiddie than the harder-edged first film. I feel like the first film had a few more edgier jokes in there, and it had like a little bit of a harder edge to it, whereas this one, I don't know, felt like it didn't quite have that edge, I thought.
Yeah. My favorite joke, however, is the one that probably slipped through, and it's probably the most adult-rated joke in the movie, is when he says, I think I'm going to have to give her a gynecological exam, and Peter Venkman just goes, who wouldn't? That's great. And also when you talk about like the scaredness and like what ingrains in your mind, those heads on the spikes in the just like I forgot, like I'd not seen the film in that long, and it turned like, oh my, that's actually quite a disturbing few seconds just when those heads show up.
That was a reshoot as well, I think, that. And the
Yeah,
ghost
it was just
train, the
put in
head,
after,
and
so
I think the bit where the photograph's set on fire, I think they felt there wasn't a sense of urgency or immediate threat to the Ghostbusters. So all three of those scenes were quite late in the game, I think, that they were shot. But yeah, I mean, that got me. Even by today's standards, that's quite, for a kid's film, you know.
Yeah. And I think as well, I think you've kind of watched this movie and you say like about Peter Venkman's journey. It's almost like he said, yeah, I'll come back, but I don't really want to do any of the Ghostbusters stuff. I'd like to have a story that's mine, and I'm this parental figure, and I'm getting back with Dana, and we're going to do that. And I'm going to go on dates with Dana and stay around with her and the kid, while the other three kind of go off and do the stuff with the slime and all of that sort of hijinks around there. So it feels like he very much came on board, like, yeah, I'll be there, but I'm not going to be in the same capacity as I was previously. And I think it felt like it stood out. You can tell he's not in with the Ghostbusters, apart from the few scenes he has to be the courtroom and then the finale. But other than that, he's not really part of the gang.
That's a really good point you mentioned, because I know you guys joked in that's like, oh, like Bill Murray had like no marshmallow on him, like you can tell he didn't want to get involved. And when you got the big scene and you get the slime and the fighting, I was like, Bill Murray is not going to do that. And I don't know if this was well known, or maybe you guys just joked about it last week and it made me think. I was like, yeah, it kind of makes sense that Bill Murray's not really around them for these big moments. And I didn't mind it because I think it worked for his character and what they were doing with him in this one. And obviously for the really big scenes, he had to be there. But all the ghost train stuff, it was just like he was quietly there or in the background, and when they needed him to be there, he kind of dipped. So I don't know if that was maybe something he got in his contract, or if it's something they wanted to do with his character to sort of distance him and keep on a character track with Sigourney Weaver. I'm not too sure about, but it was very noticeable. But I'm still glad they did the big scenes, because you know you need the four of them. They kind of write out Ernie Hudson briefly, but at least it makes a bit of sense that, you know, he doesn't want to do the job, and when they're back being Ghostbusters, of course he'll come back. So I think it was all right in this one. It wasn't as much as right as I thought it would be. But just with the others, I loved Howard Ramis. I mentioned it last week, and I think he's my favorite again in this. That I think he just has a presence, and it's not because he's tall or has a deep voice. There's just something about him where he doesn't fit in, and that's why he's so perfect in this. Like, Bill Murray is just too cool to be a Ghostbuster. Like, in theory, I kind of had this last week. Please don't get upset with this comparison. They're kind of like the in-betweeners. They're the four of them. They actually remind me of the in-betweeners a lot. Like, just socially awkward, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's not one in-betweener that shouldn't be there. I think Howard Ramis is a bit like the Neil of the group, obviously a bit different. But that's just this weird thought I've had recently. I don't know if, I mean, no one's probably comparing to the in-betweens in their lifetime, but it's just that like social awkwardness that they have.
He does have my favorite line in this film, which kind of shows his awkwardness, where he says, I had a slinky once. I straightened it. I don't know why. That just really got me. I thought that was the best line. I didn't remember that line either, so it really caught me off guard watching it again. And we talked about like the relationship angle that's kind of going on with Peter Venkman and Sigourney Weaver. I don't know. It felt like they didn't really know what to do with Sigourney Weaver in this film again. It's like, we've got to make her a damsel in distress again. And, you know, I guess it is a nice kind of new dynamic for Bill Murray's character in this one, but it felt like, right, we've just got to reset it, and we can't have them immediately in a relationship because, you know, that's too difficult to write. So we've got to have that intrigue, that will they, won't they again, like we had in the first film. And then you have like another romantic angle going on in the film. You've got Rick Moranis' character of Louis Tully back with Annie Potts with Janine. I really like that aspect, and I think that romantic aspect really works between those two slightly awkward characters. It's kind of weird that they abandoned the will they, won't they with Egon, because I felt like, you know, especially when you watch that first film again, there's a lot of that awkward flirtation there, probably more flirtation from, and he's just like blissfully unaware, which was part of the charm of it. So I don't know how I feel about that shakeup. I mean, Dave, you did like a double bill back to back for this, so I don't know if that was more jarring seeing them play out back to back and them kind of neglect that aspect. But I do like that they increased Louis Tully's aspect of the character. Rick Moranis is always great, and I love that he actually kind of becomes the unofficial fifth Ghostbuster by the end of the film. He's kind of just like the lovable idiot, really, isn't he? That kind of unwittingly becomes a hero, even though realistically he didn't actually do anything.
I love him in the courtroom scene. I think he's amazing in the courtroom scene as the bumbling lawyer for them. I just think it's amazing when he's just, no, you've helped them fine. You've helped them enough. When he asks me if he's got any more questions, I think he's just played to perfection. It does, like, yeah, you go from one movie and you see Janine with Egon, and then they kind of totally change her character in from what she was. It's kind of like, yeah, she's a bit of a flirty secretary, to then give her the very orange hair and the loud outfits, much more like Janine in the real Ghostbusters cartoon. Again, it seems very similar to that they've gone with that, and I didn't mind it. It's so nice, the little relationship between her and Lewis, that I don't mind it so much. Even though yes, it's like you had that, but she seems like she had a total personality change in between the two movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think as well, you mentioned with Rick Moss about this. Obviously, and this again, maybe Afterlife. I love the fact he got the suit. I think it worked. I think I loved what they did with his character, because you can't have him. He can't be the awkward neighbor again. You've got to do something else with him, but he's still got to be the comic relief, because that's what he is of the film. You know, it's one thing to be comic relief normally, but comic relief with comedy, you got to be able to add something. And I really enjoyed what they did with him, the relationship stuff, and I'm wondering if he might be in the new one. I know he took the leave of absence I know he was after his wife passed away, he looked after his family, and I know that they'd announced him for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. But I'm wondering, this is complete speculation. Does anyone think he could have a cameo in the new film? Because we know he's coming back to acting. I think he was in an advert at Super Bowl this year. I would really love him to pop up in the new one, and that's someone that's not big on the films, because I would find it very weird if he's coming back into acting now, didn't do a cameo in Afterlife, but then went into Honey, I Shrunk the Kids too. I know that's obviously a bigger role for him, but do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see, right? I'd love to see it, because we know that Janine's in the film, and I feel like if this is going to be a direct sequel to Ghostbusters 2, they have kind of got to touch on what happened with her and Lewis, unless it's going to be like an in-between Ghostbusters 1 and 2 thing with Peter and Sigourney Weaver's character. It's just like, oh yeah, it didn't work out, which could entirely happen. But yeah, I hope he's in the film. He's been gone from film for a long, long time, and it would be good to see him back, and hopefully he's still got that same spark there. I think we should talk about some of the villains now. So I'm going to save my favorite character till last. But you've got the villain of this film, his stage name, and I don't think you can get a more Germanic name than this, to be honest. It's Wilhelm von Homburg, who plays the character of Vigo the Carpathian, who, I'm going to be honest, isn't a great villain. And I remembered the ending being a lot more impressive than it actually is, and it just feels very underwhelming. And apparently that was a reshoot, because the one they had before that was even more underwhelming. This is the more impressive ending and finale with his character, but I don't know, he just doesn't really have much presence. I will say, though, I was surprised to find out that Max von Sydow did the voice. So obviously it was dubbed, and then Max von Sydow came in and did the voice, which apparently Wilhelm didn't know about until he went to see the film at the premiere, and then saw that they'd, removed his voice, and apparently wasn't too happy about that. But he just looks so awkward when he walks out the painting at the end, and he's in like this awkward costume, and it doesn't look threatening at all. But so there's that. But my favorite character in this film, and the one redeeming, actually no, there's a few redeeming factors in this film, I'm being too harsh on it, but a cut above the rest is Peter McNichol as the character of Janisch. Oh my god, he is having so much fun in this, and every time he's on screen, I'm having so much fun too. He is completely larger than life, over the top. What is with that accent? Apparently that wasn't in the script. He just said, like, I want to have this accent. And I'm so glad that he does have the accent. He's just, I can't say enough positive words about him. He's just absolutely insane. From when he's being, actually, even from the off, he's quite creepy, isn't he? Let's be honest. Even before he gets possessed, he's infinitely creepy. And then I'd say he kind of becomes creepier when he's playing a creepy spectral nanny with an extendable arm to grab children off ledges. That's probably the scariest image in the whole film, is him in drag in that moment. But yeah, I think he's
the glowing eyes down there as well, creep me out as a child. Still got me a little bit when I watched it. Turns around, he's got like the lights in the eyes. Like, nope, not watching that.
It's one of them with him as well, where, because I've only seen him in Bean, and I think he's been in like big films like Sophie's Choice before. It was really weird for me to think like, oh, like what's this? But I was expecting like another deadbeat Bean thing. Like you see him in a museum, and like, okay, what's this going to be? And then you just get that accent.
So it is
I think
Viggo.
Yeah, and I think you know what you're going to get straight away, and it's just absolutely insane. Like, and I think it's one of them. He probably knew he was doing a comedy, and because it's lesbians without the accent, it's just like it's not even creepy. It's just like a bit of a wrong one. But the accent not makes it right, but it makes it a fit for the film. That he is that absolute weirdo that's got an accent, and I don't know if that sounds worse than what it is, but you add that dimension into it, and he was just like really good at being creepy. But I think it's a kind of innocent creep at the start, and then when he gets possessed, obviously it delves further. And for like when he turns up to the house when the lights are off, Screamer's like, "No, you can't come in." And it's just he was so funny in it, and I think that's what you wanted from a film like this. That I guess the first film, you haven't really got a definitive. I mean, you've got villains, but you don't have this. I think maybe what's the name of the inspector guy who worked for the law enforcement, who was like shouting at them.
Peck.
That's it.
That was
Peck,
it.
yeah.
And you had Peck and stuff, and it's okay. But this was this is like villain, henchman type thing. And I'm with you, Chris. I really didn't like the main villain. I was like, oh, he's 105 years old, and he died like every single way possible. I was like, dude looks about mid to late 50s. Like, I get you don't want to make it, too old, but it just, I was like, man in photo, does that make him a ghost? Is that really a ghost? And it was really weird. That guy, I didn't like him, but all the curators of the museum I loved. I love for him to have turned into a monster instead with a ridiculous accent. Something like that would have been amazing, but it's a shame they went with that sort of kind of weird history angle to it, because I don't think that helped the film.
Mm-hmm.
And even like we mentioned earlier, I love the spikes and the heads that you guys mentioned, but I hated the ghost train so much. I don't know if it's just me, but the spikes stuff was like, whoa, this is a bit grisly for Ghostbusters. I didn't expect something like this, whereas the other stuff was like, oh, okay, I get it. It is still a kid's film.
I think I'm with you both on the Viggo thing. That for the entire, mostly like 90% of this movie, he's just a picture and doesn't really do anything apart from speak out, and his head pops out a little bit and goes a bit 3D in the picture at one point. And then to say when he comes out the picture, he just can barely walk in his costume. Those shoulder blades, those shoulder pads are massive, and his hair looks terrible, really. So our real protagonist is obviously is our wonderful curator of the museum. Just he's so good throughout this. I say really creepy when he needs to be. Even when he's trying to be friendly, just comes off a little rapey. And it's not good. But in a really fantastic way, and it plays really well that he is really the big bad of it. To even get the point where Viggo's gone and he gets all lovey-dovey then because of the ooze, and I just think you get this little story for him, being this guy who just wants to be with Dana, to then being all loved up with the ooze at the end. And he's just fantastic in it.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. And we mentioned the kind of weird out there idea for like the painting and the Carpathian and everything like that. That's nothing on what Akroyd originally had for this. Now, we know that he's a kooky guy. I mentioned that last week, but I mean, this is on Wikipedia, so take it with a pinch of salt, but obviously there's got to be some credence to this. And he even admitted that his original idea for Ghostbusters 2 was, quote, really too far out and too inaccessible. He didn't want to set it in New York again. He wanted to set it overseas, completely different environment. And the plot was going to be, I'm going to read it directly. It followed Dana Barrett, who is kidnapped and taken to Scotland, where she discovers a fairy ring, which is a naturally occurring ring or arc of mushrooms, which is sometimes linked in folklore to fairies and witches and things like that. And she discovers an underground civilization. The Ghostbusters would have had to travel through an underground pneumatic tube over 2,000 miles long that would have taken them 3 days to traverse. And then he eventually relented and thought that no, actually setting it in New York would be a better continuity between the first film. And thank God they did. This becomes incredibly patriotic at the end of the film. And I know some people hate it. I love the walking Statue of Liberty. I love it. Higher and higher playing on the speakers. It's always like the positive and negative energy throughout the film, which, take it for what it is. It's a bit on the nose. I get what they're trying to do thematically, but it's great when you've got like all the public of New York cheering it on as their landmark is walking through the city, and the Ghostbusters controlling it with like a Nintendo joystick. I don't get how that works. What's it hooked up to? Are they controlling the Statue of Liberty? Is the Statue of Liberty just doing its own thing because it's covered in slime? I don't know. I don't care. I love the Statue of Liberty part, and I know a lot of people hate it and find it ridiculous. It is, but I get a kick out of it every time, and I think it's probably down to the song a little bit as well.
I thought it was very cheesy.
It is. No, it is. It is. It
But
absolutely is.
I will
Yeah.
say, when they're in the foyer, it looks like the AT-AT, when it's because it's got like not the foyer, the control room.
Yeah.
And like the way it was just walking, and they've got this like slit essentially as a vision piece. I just kept thinking Star Wars. I'm not going to be paying 750 quid though for the new AT-AT set, which is everywhere on the news. But yeah, it's one of them. I understand doing something that's activity when it's a film that's how great is New York. Those kind of films, it is one of the landmarks. Do like you're not gonna you can't make the Empire State Building walk and that kind of stuff. So it makes sense to do something like that, especially when you're not trying to do what I know they're kind of nicking stuff from the first, but you don't want a carbon copy ending of the first one. You don't want another giant marshmallow man. You get something giant, but then you have something else as big to be against it, and I think that actually works in its favor. But I think the whole purpose is it is cheesy, and the fact that they're singing in the ship as well, like they're aware of that song. It wasn't something picked in post. That was something they were knowing they were going to use, I guess. So it's one of them that it added to it, but I can let something like that slip. Yeah, it might not have earned it for the film, but I'd rather see something different than something I've already seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's. I mean, I love the Statue of Liberty bit. I absolutely loved it walking through the streets. I love the use it that it's giving hope, and that then affects I see the slime around the building. It looks like a really badly rendered jelly mold that's on the building at the end. It's just so badly done. It stands out. Some of the effects have not held up well in these two movies over Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, and that is certainly one of the look at it like, oh, that looks terrible. But I love that you use the Statue of Liberty to break through and go through the roof. It's just that hopeful kind of joy of a ending of a movie where you're coming towards the good guys triumphing finally. And as I say, a symbol of hope they're using. That's probably the best one they could have used. I loved it.
Yeah, it's a great song to use for that as well. It always makes me smile every time I see it. I guess that takes us on to music as well. Not quite the hit of a soundtrack, I would say, than the first film, but I do think it was a very difficult act to follow. 1989, I didn't realize how quick, hot off the heels, the 90s was approaching when you listen to this soundtrack. It is rife. We've got the rap coming through, the hip hop kind of stuff. I was like, oh, here we go. We've got Bobby Brown, who has, is it 2 songs in the soundtrack? I forget how many he has. I don't know if he's just got the one in there, but it's bad. It's not great. We've got Randy Edelman doing the actual score for this film as well, which very different sound to the previous composer. It doesn't quite have that ghostly, like eerie feel to it. That being said, there's moments in the score where like the ghostly stuff is happening. I think it's a really, really good score underlying for that. I think it's usually played in like the River of Slime. It's the ghostly elements really, but I think even Randy Edelman mentioned that when he was scoring the film, he wanted to keep it restrained as possible because he just wanted to kind of let the chemistry play out on screen with these characters, and he didn't feel the need to score every single part of the film, and he just wanted to focus on like the action scenes and the ghostly scenes, which is fair enough. What songs do I really like? I do like the song is it On Our Own? I think that's the main one, isn't it? Or is it We're Back? I'm not sure. The one that plays during the montage. Yeah, he's singing it to himself right now. You know the one I'm talking about. Yeah. The main one. That's probably my favorite of the soundtrack, but beyond that, I'd be hard pushed to find a song that I really enjoy in this one. It works for the film though, and the time that it's at, but yeah, not quite the star power of that soundtrack as the first one, I don't think.
No, the music I really struggled with. I wasn't aware there was essentially a second theme. And again, me being an outsider completes the franchise, I thought they're just going to keep playing the same way Star Wars. You just keep playing the same song, and it's the best way to do it because it is that theme. When they kept using this other song as a kind of unofficial theme, I was like, this isn't how the Ghostbusters films should work, and I didn't know. And I think that's where I struggled because I think Chris, you're right. It didn't. I mean, I know it is 89. You are near the 90s, but it felt so far into the 90s. And I think did we have the same chat during a Rocky film? I think what Rocky film was 89?
Rocky 5. Rocky 5 was the 9th. Yeah, absolutely.
And it felt very 90s as well. And I thought, okay, the eras are changing, but I think because Ghostbusters is so clearly an 80s product, and that's not meant in a bad way. That is the timing of it, that where those actors were in their careers, the comedy that was coming out, all that kind of stuff. It felt really odd to then get this sudden change of things. And I know they do use the main theme again, but I didn't really notice the soundtrack at all. I'm not gonna lie. It didn't do anything for me. I just keep thinking of the main theme, and obviously it ends with a different theme as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is where I was like, I'm sure someone somewhere's probably slapped the original logo on top of all that stuff, but not logo, original song. But yeah, I struggled with the music on this film. I'm not gonna lie. And as I said, I wasn't a big fan of the first, so it's really weird. I formed a bit of an attachment to the second one. But I've been thinking about the first one a lot more over the last week, which is something worth saying. It's had a bit more of a pull on me, I think, thinking about it. So maybe down the line there'll be another rewatch. Who knows?
Have they announced a song for Ghostbusters Afterlife, like a title song? I mean, they're probably just going to use the one that everyone
I hope
knows,
not.
right? But
I think it'd be for when there's a 30-year time gap. I mean, again, another conversation, but in the trailer, it's got them watching the old advert.
Mhm.
I'd assume that they'd have them listening to the original song. I
yeah,
think it'd be very weird for them to do a new theme whilst. Yeah, it's an
was it going to be
interesting.
like Ghostbusters by Ed Sheeran or Cardi B or Pitbull or something? Like, God forbid, I hope not. But
Well,
ugh, oh boy,
there is in the main trailer there is a new version of the Ghostbusters theme,
hmm
like a little bit faster, a little bit more modern
dubsteppy,
sounding, but
isn't it?
it's
I
still
think.
the
Yeah.
same song. Whether that's just for the trailer or over some credits, I don't know whether they're going to use it in film. If they are, you would thought because Ray Potter Jr.'s song is in canon, of course, that you would have that somewhere playing. There's no doubt we'll hear it at some point. The original version. They're not going to go through this movie Afterlife without playing at some point. There's no way.
No, absolutely. I mean, we'll wait in a week's time, won't we? I guess to see what is in store for us. We'll find out. But let's talk about some favorite scenes then, because I don't think we've been overly negative on this one. I think we've been fairly balanced. Because I do have some favorite scenes in this one. And as I mentioned, they're kind of all like the ghostly ones, the ones that stuck with me. I do think the River of Slime is a really striking image. I do like that when they kind of rappel down and you've got that wide shot of the River of Slime. I do appreciate that. It's kind of a double-edged sword with the Scoleri brothers for me, because on the one hand, I really like the design of them, but then I'm also confused that they're meant to be human ghosts, and you do see human ghosts in the film. You've got that runner that they trap during the montage, but these look like they're in the Muppets, and it's really strange to me. And also, their electric chairs came with them. Electric chairs have spirits as well. It's very strange to me, and I shouldn't be thinking about these things when I'm watching Ghostbusters 2, but yeah, I like the designs of them as like a quirky ghost, but they're meant to be like actual convicts that were killed and died there, so that was very strange to me. But my favorite scene of the whole film, not counting every single Yonish scene in this film, is the ghost montage towards the end, and that was the scene that really buried its way into my mind. And it is quite creepy and it is quite eerie. And I like that element of sort of like danger to it. As we talked about last week in kids' films, I think it's important to have those elements in some films. The mink coat is absolutely horrific when that comes alive and you've got them all like bursting out and screaming and it like scurries across the floor. Absolutely disgusting and really grim, but I absolutely love it. You've got the kind of Ray Harryhausen style monster that comes under the archway. Looks a little bit ropey, but it's fine. I don't mind a little bit of stop motion in there. But the one that really sealed the deal for me was the Titanic. And I always remember it's the music as well during that scene, I think is really effective during that whole montage scene. And I remember, because obviously I would have been watching this in the 90s, I had watched the film Titanic at a very young age at the time. So I was knowledgeable of it from the film, at least, knowing that, loads of people died on this thing and the whole ship sinking thing. And then there was also Ghostbusters 2 that I used to watch. And I just think that's a really eerie image of it pulling up. It's docked. You've kind of got like the foghorn that's blaring. And then you've just got like all those people that are like pale faced, covered in seaweed and stuff. I don't know. That image just really stuck with me as a kid. So I'd probably say it's the ghost montage that's like my favorite scene in this film. How about you guys? Is there anything I forgot to mention?
Oh, best scene. I'm not going to be smug and say there's not really a good scene, but I didn't have anything stand out. And that sounds really odd because I've actually given a bit. I don't want to say my favorite scene is them all being depressed at the start because that's a bit sad. But I don't have anything that definitively stuck out for me. I don't have a single like one liner that really blew me away by the slinky part. I didn't like the slime scene. I liked the head on the spike, but I didn't like the ghost train. So, is it cruel to say I liked the baby wheeling away at the start? Is that cruel? I thought that was quite funny. thought that was a really, really well done. Bit creepy, what you kind of expect as well. But I guess I could say I really like the concept of the river underneath. That the whole the underneath was still the remains of what's he called, the villain from the first one, V something.
Oh, what
Zoo.
Zul,
Is it
Zul.
essentially the remains of that? That's what I sort of took it as.
No, it's just the negative energy that's built up from like everyone being dicks to each other in New York. Essentially, it's just kind of congealed into a slime. That's what it is.
Well, I liked seeing all that stuff come together, but I don't actually have a favorite scene from this film, which is really odd because normally I've got something to pull at for most films, but for this one, it would just be all the scenes with the guy from Mr. Bean. That's the politest thing I can say.
I did remember another thing, just really quickly before you give us your favorite scene, Dave. Another thing that kind of used to really creep me out as a kid and scare me a little bit was the monster face makeup on Ray at the end when he becomes possessed for a little bit and turns to the camera. I do actually think that's really good makeup. I think that is fantastic makeup on him at the end, and it always used to terrify me as a kid. I used to love watching the film, but there was always moments where you kind of dread just a little bit. You kind of have to mentally prepare yourself before you got to those scenes, and that was always the scene for me that did it when he got possessed a little bit at the end.
There's a terrifying sort of look to him. It's just because it doesn't look like the painting looked. It wasn't like he's put his image on him, but it's a completely this horrific version, which maybe he should have looked like in the painting to give you a bit more dread about what was coming, rather than just this middle-aged
guy,
middle-aged guy. You're just like, yeah, just me hanging out.
He looks like
hanging
he's at
out
some kind of Renaissance fair, doesn't he, or something, or some kind of historical reenactment. Yeah.
But yeah, my two favorite scenes. I love the courtroom scene. From start to finish, I love Lewis in it. I think he's brilliant. I love the cross-examination. I love Egon at the end with that, let's say, that smile that he gives when he says Egon and knows he's made a funny joke, which he doesn't normally make. And then one of my favorite scenes is after the bathtub tries to eat Oscar and Sigourney Weaver takes them over to Bill Murray's. And I just think it's a really nice character development moment of Bill Murray becoming this father figure to a child that he's only just met, and then immediately becoming like that safe haven for dinner. I think it's just a really nicely played scene. And obviously the one where they've got Sigourney Weaver, like, we need you to just take your shirt off just for like a scene, if that's all right, Sigourney. Because it's the 80s and we have to have somebody do it. So yeah, I just think it's really well played by Bill Murray that he just takes to this fatherhood role. Really nice, really sweet. They're my two favorite scenes.
Yeah, I guess it is a nice time. That's the scene where he has like the football jersey, isn't it? Yeah. I think that he wraps Oscar. Yeah, I guess that is a nice scene. Yeah, I guess I've never really paid attention to the dynamic much now, but I guess through this conversation, I'm like, yeah, at least they were trying something a bit different with his character. I guess that kind of takes us on to final thoughts on the film then. So, as I mentioned, I don't hate this film. You know, there's a lot of people that absolutely detest this film, and you know, if you do, fair play to you. You know, keep rocking that hate flag for Ghostbusters 2. I'm not in that camp at all. I just think that watching it again, I did just find it very underwhelming. I didn't remember it being as closely tied, almost beat for beat, plot point for plot point to the original film as it actually was. And even though it was the same writers, you know, same director, same cast, it just didn't feel like it had that spark, or I don't know. I guess like everyone here wanted to be in it and wanted to do it, I guess, but I don't know. Lightning didn't strike twice for me on this one. It's fine. I don't know when I'm ever going to go back to Ghostbusters 2, in all honesty, after watching it again. The first one, I'll quite happily watch that whenever, but this was almost like a background noise film for me, and I never remembered it being that way for me. So I guess it has dropped down in my estimations just a bit, but I still think it's a fine film. You know, you've got all the original cast in there, as I mentioned, and they're still great, even if the writing isn't quite as sharp as the first film was. But yeah, I guess that's my overall thoughts on Ghostbusters 2.
I'm in a weird stance to this, that actually I don't massively like it. I don't think it's very good, but there are moments I appreciate and plot points I appreciate. I just think they're on the verge of doing something really interesting and really, like, not dramatic, but something different. But then it is a sequel. At the end of the day, it does need to go back to the roots, and it is about busting ghosts, not a drama about sort of depressed adults. So it's one of them I'm quite torn on, because I appreciate a lot of it, but I accepted it's not very good. It's definitely not better than the first one. We'll say that. Though I probably spoke more highly of this film than the first one from last week. I definitely, this one has far more issues, and that going down to the fact I can't even pick a favourite scene. I don't think there's anything that stood out, just ideas that worked and weren't sort of carried off properly. So yeah, I'm sure people at home are probably more fond of it. I think, again, I'll say the same thing as Ghostbusters 1. If I'd have seen this age of 7 or 8, I think I'd probably love this film. You know, I'm very polite with the films I like as a kid that haven't aged well, or films that just actually aren't very good as you watch as an adult. And I think this one would have been one where I was, again, sort of, well, not 10 years too old now, but maybe 15 years too old. But it's an interesting one because it does have its fans, and that's the thing. Like, this is a, you know, we say franchise, of course, have the animated show and stuff like that, but for something so big that only had 2 films until the 10s, that's quite an achievement when you really look at sort of how modern cinema's gone down those sort of paths. I'm very surprised they never did a trilogy in the 90s. I understand why they didn't. They probably didn't want to as well. But, you know, there's other things to take into account.
I had a couple of years and I was very much in the camp of it's Ghostbusters 2 and I'll watch it because we're watching both movies together back to back because I'm going to see Afterlife next Thursday. So yeah, I'll watch them both. And I had a really great time with Ghostbusters 2, that more than I remembered or was expecting. I think there's a character moments, and I think you're right. There's not a great lot to it. It is a sort of a retelling of Ghostbusters again. It's such a quick just over 90-minute movie. It moves at a really nice pace, some really nice character moments, some good laughs. I've had a really great time. Now, I'd quite happily go back and watch it. Maybe not straight away, but I'd definitely revisit it again. I really enjoyed it.
There you go. So there's your balanced review on Ghostbusters 2. I don't think you can get more balanced than that. So I guess just before we round off, we started this Ghostbusters review series, I guess, a trilogy of reviews, I'll say, in the lead up to Afterlife, which of course comes out next week. So we'll kind of just give our initial thoughts on Ghostbusters Afterlife, what we've seen. Upon recording this, a new trailer came out a couple of days ago. I think it's called the final trailer, which I don't think any of us have seen. I don't think we have any intention of seeing that trailer right now because we are so close to the release date. Dazzle me. That's what I'm kind of going to go into it. I'm not going to build my hopes up. I'm not like overly hyped for it. That might be down to the fact that I've seen the trailer more times than I think is humanly possible to ever see in a lifetime. Every film I go to at the cinema, whether it's an 18, 15, 12, PG, anything, this trailer is always at the beginning. And I hate the fact that I have to keep seeing this trailer. My one concern from it, from what I've seen in the trailers, is it going to be too familiar? Is it going to be just all the same iconography that we've seen? We know that the Zool dogs are back in it, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and Slimer's, of course, he's going to be back. He's in all of them. So I don't know. Is it going to be too much like Stranger Things? Is that the only reason that this film exists, is to kind of chase off the coattails of that series? And is it going to be a bit too reverential? Is it going to be a bit too far up itself? Because it is made so many years after the fact, and it's, we're ignoring the 2016 one. This is a sequel to Ghostbusters 2. It's the son of the original director. Is it going to be a bit too, not pompous isn't the right word, but a bit too overly emotional, I guess, because Ghostbusters was never that. Star Wars The Force Awakens, you can make that argument. Star Wars is a legacy thing from generation to generation, whereas Ghostbusters, it's just kind of like a fun, oddball comedy with ghosts in there. I don't think it needs to quite go to that same level, but I don't know. I really want it to be good. I hope it's good. I hope I'm at least entertained by it, and that it's another fun Ghostbusters experience. But I'm essentially not getting my hopes up, because I know what happens when I usually get my hopes up for a film before going into it.
I'm in a weird terrain with this because I didn't know anything about Ghostbusters 2. I was loving it. I mean, based off that trailer where at the end they pick the phone up and put it down, basically. That's what I was like, are we going to get a they've been away for 20, 30 year type thing? Did everything go wrong? And then Ghostbusters 2 was like, we had it for 5 years, and that's the stuff I was really enjoying. So I'm more, I don't want to say concerned, but I've kind of got the acceptance of advertising that it's going to be a lot like Stranger Things with the kids. But I'm hoping that when we get the adults, there's a bit of story and that there's a bit of development over the decades. Of course, one of the Ghostbusters isn't with us anymore. How will that be addressed in the films? I've been watching a show recently, Curb Enthusiasm, and one of the one of the leading supporting actors passed away between like seasons 9 and 10, and it's Funkhauser for anyone that watches it, and they never formally acknowledged it. They just kind of put his cousins in it, and it was more out of respect. And I'm curious to see what Ghostbusters is going to do, because obviously that's a much bigger role. It's got a much important legacy as well. So after watching these two, I'm looking forward to it a little bit more than I was before. I'm not going to the cinema between now and then, don't have to worry about seeing that bloody trailer. It doesn't help I saw Dune so many times because I got the same batch of trailers. Now my trailer envy went from getting Bond for 2 years straight to Ghostbusters for 2 months straight to Matrix for 3 months straight. You know, once Matrix is out, I don't know what's going to be next year's film. They're spamming on the trailers, but
we've still got Top Gun trailers to come, haven't we? That still hasn't come out yet.
But they've stopped though. We've not seen them for a few
That's
months,
true.
so we're
That is
safe.
true,
We're
yeah.
safe. But yeah, hype for this one. I wouldn't say I'm hyped, but I'm very curious. But I can understand why a lot of people are hyped. I think it's got the potential to be a big sleeper hit. I think it doesn't help that it's actually one of the Stranger Things cast members being in it. That's my perspective. But you know, today Paul Rudd was voted world's sexiest man, and I absolutely love Paul Rudd, so that's another bonus.
I am on the hype train for this movie. I know I'm going to go in to a pure trip into nostalgia. I think it's going to be laid on, like Chris has those fears. I think it's going to be laid on so thick of, remember this movie? Remember when this was in that movie? That's okay for me. You know what? I'm going to have a good time. I know I'm going to cry at several points when I see characters and when I hear a car siren at certain points. I know that's going to affect me in a way that just that the movie means so much to me, especially the original one. So I know it's going to hit nostalgic beats all the way through. And you know what? That's kind of what I expect from it. So I think I'm okay with that. I think the Stranger Things reference is very much, especially getting the kid, I can't remember his name.
Finn Wolfhard. Yeah.
Finn Wolfhard, sorry. I think having him in, maybe that is going to go people, oh, yeah, you're going to get that same sort of thing. Obviously, they had the Ghostbusters outfits as well in one of the, I think, series 2 where they wore them. So you get that feeling from it. But I'm looking forward to kind of seeing, especially the kid who looks like she's playing Egon's great niece or great granddaughter. I'm really looking forward to seeing the kids take the lead. And you're right, when the main Ghostbusters come in, once I've wiped away the tears of seeing them again on screen in uniforms, I'm sure it'll be lovely to find out what they've been doing and what's been happening. And I'm excited to see how they cross between the little town they're in and how the Ghostbusters get back together if they're not still around each other right now. So yeah, I can't wait. Thursday next week, I'll be going to see this on day of release because I have to, and I'm really, really excited.
Well, I'm not going to hold my breath that Bill Murray will come back for it, but you know what will be the most depressing thing? If he doesn't come back for Ghostbusters Afterlife, but he came back for Ghostbusters 2016. That will kind of... I don't know.
Curious about, to put you both on the spot, because you've got a bigger history to... We've spoken about Force Awakens comparisons, which I think is really valid.
Yeah, no, it is.
Another Force Awakens comparison. In 2015... they didn't want to reference the prequels because at the time, George Lucas ruined our childhood. George Lucas did this. We're not going to sort of acknowledge the prequels. I know they did the clone joke. Would this do something similar to Ghostbusters 2, or is that too harsh on Ghostbusters 2? Because that's something I thought of yesterday. Are they going to go straight for 84 because 89's got a bit of aggro amongst the fan base, or are they going to reference both and move on? Because really, I know, again, different companies, but Lucasfilm has only, since the 40th anniversary in 2017 and bringing back Clone Wars, that's when the prequel era has been solidified again by the company as well as fans. And I wonder if there's a bit of sort of reflection for both of them being quite mirrored, actually.
I don't think they can ignore it completely because, I mean, it's still Ivan Reitman who directed it, and it being his son, I think he's going to look at both of those films fondly. But from what we've seen in the trailers, it does look like they're definitely tending more towards the first one. As I mentioned, you know, you've got the taxi zombie ghost returning again, Zuldog, Stay Puft. So everything in the film, it looks like it's going back to that first one mostly, which again is like the Force Awakens thing, you know, going back to A New Hope where it all started, kind of rehashing the same thing again. I don't think they'll ignore it completely, but I think it will be kind of glossed over in comparison to the first one, at least.
I think it will be glossed over entirely. I don't think they'll mention it. I think they're expecting the audience to go in this movie as fans of Ghostbusters and probably more so the original movie. And I think they will play off that. I know in the first teaser trailer that came out, Paul Rudd's talking about, if you go back to 1980s, it was just all about the New York back then, which is full of ghosts. And I think they're very much going to give you a brief look into the history. I don't know if it'll be mentioned. Maybe Janine's in the movie, so she might gloss over something, but I don't think they're going to reference much of Ghostbusters 2 at all. I think it's all going to be aimed at this first Ghostbusters movie.
Well, do you remember, just like a weird side tangent before we round off? Do you remember when the first trailer came out for the 2016 one? And that felt like it was going for like a real Force Awakens kind of vibe to it. It was like a soft piano version of the Ghostbusters theme playing, like a black title screen, like 30 years ago. They saved New York, and it was like tugging on your heartstrings. And then the film came out, and it was absolutely nothing to do with that. It was
Nothing,
like its
yeah.
own thing. So I don't know. I want it to be good. I hope it's going to be good, and in a week's time we'll find out. So I guess that'll, this is the advertisement. So next week, Ghostbusters Afterlife review. That's going to be Monday, the 22nd of November. You'll be getting our first time review on that. Probably have some spoiler elements to it too, but that'll be good fun to like talk about that one. We've got our complete nice little Ghostbusters trilogy of reviews on the channel finally. And in the meantime, you've got a week until then. Comment with your thoughts on Ghostbusters 2 as well. Do you hate it? Do you love it? Are you somewhere in between? Very kind of mixed emotions and mixed opinions on this review on Ghostbusters 2, but that's all great, and we want to hear from you guys. So as always, please do be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Guys, we're kind of moving into daily content almost from this point onwards. We haven't been lying to you when we've said that the months of November and December are absolutely packed, because they are. So I'm going to pass over to George for the next one, because this is, again, another trilogy of films that we're kind of going through, which we're absolutely loving at the moment.
Yeah, akin to this, we have another comedy sequel. Spoiler alert, a much funnier one. Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me reviews coming tomorrow night at the time this going up. Tuesday the 16th of November, with 2 out of the 3 films in. They've been an absolute delight to revisit. Comedy genius. It's just amazing. So go back, watch the film, then watch our review, then watch the second film, and then go watch our review, and then watch the third one, because an hour and a half comedy in and out, more glowing than I've just spoken about Ghostbusters 2. So apologies, Ghostbusters fans, but yeah, that's one. It's Austin Powers, it's Mike Myers. You can't really go wrong with him at all. So do check that out. And then I'm going to hand over to Chris before we talk about another one starting this week for a continuation of one of the big ones with the Peter Jackson retrospective.
Yep, so we're up to the oh dear, this is the 4th feature film now from Peter Jackson. Had to count in my head then. So that'll be Heavenly Creatures review. This was his first drama film. This kind of gave him probably a little bit more credence to directing the Lord of the Rings films. In the lead up to December, where we're going to be talking about Lord of the Rings and a lot of other things too, actually, in hindsight, but a lot of Lord of the Rings stuff coming in December. Wanted to take it upon myself to go through his older films and go through his filmography. So check out that review. That's at the slightly later time every week of every Thursday, 10 p.m. GMT. So obviously that's this Thursday, 18th of November, for Heavenly Creatures. And again, we haven't seen it before, so first time opinions on that one. But sort of moving back a day before then to Wednesday, we have actually done reviews on this trilogy specifically, but we're going a little bit further than a trilogy this time, but we're revisiting an old favorite, a lifelong favorite, I'll say. George, what have we got coming up on Wednesday the 17th?
The Holy Trinity of Spider-Man films begins with a review on 2002's Spider-Man, of course, directed by Sam Raimi, starring yours truly, Tobey Maguire. By the time we've started recording this, hopefully we've got a new trailer by then. I guess it's timely to say that the rumors are the final / second trailer will be out with Ghostbusters Afterlife. Both, of course, Sony productions. That actually teases a lot better than I thought it would. But no, we're going to be going back through these. We did them many years ago. I'm actually going to re-listen to them just to check if we can switch up anything, bring in a couple of new things. And it's going to be one Spider-Man film a week from November 17th through to December 15th of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. We're not going to be reviewing the Tom Holland films, because not only do we have reviews on them from both release dates, we also have 2 reviews on them from the Infinity Saga retrospective earlier this year. Dave, were you on both of them with me? I can't remember, but
I'm definitely on one. I don't know if I was on both. I think I'm definitely on one of them.
Yeah, we can't justify doing the Tom Holland reviews for twice in the same year, 3 times in the channel history. So, and we might look like idiots. Maybe Garfield and Tobey Maguire aren't in the film. Who knows? So, if you've kept yourself off the internet, there's plenty of rumors about these days, plenty of watermarks about other things as well.
We'll delete all the reviews if they're not in the film. We'll just delete them off the channel.
We'll wipe them out. There's great thumbnails. There's everything. But if you're a fan of, I guess we got to say Spider-Man now, not Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Join us the next few weeks. And next year isn't just the 20th anniversary of the Raimi films. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the character being created. Wow. So maybe there'll be more Spider-Man things. Who knows? So do join us for them. It's going to be an absolute incredible experience. And the four-year gap in which we've had between each reviews, a lot has changed, and that's pre-Spider-Man rumors. We've had the PS4 game, the films, an animated Spider-Verse film. So much has changed. The Raimi memes have come on. It's going to be an insane discussion, so join us for that. And I'm going to hand over to Dave as well. Sorry to hype up Spider-Man so much. I should have done this first. If people want to find you at home, of course, we've got a link in the description for the channel as well. What's currently happening on The Life of Brian and what is coming up next, essentially?
Life of Brian is currently on with the Terminator build that is almost finished, and I've also got the Ecto 1 to get back to, which is amazing. That's going to be kind of featuring quite heavily on the channel over the next coming weeks once the Terminator Who's Staring Down at Me is finished. And then we'll kind of look at hopefully some new things coming to my channel. I'm not quite sure exactly what the focus will all be, but hopefully we're looking at some of the new Star Wars stuff that comes out, as I quite like talking about and I haven't done for a while. So yeah, that'll probably where it'll head in the future. And I'm also only like 70 subs away from 1500. So if anybody's bored and wants to press subscribe, if you go to my channel, that'd be amazing.
Go and do it. I have seen that Terminator. I got a quick glimpse of it last week. That thing is imposing. I absolutely love that thing. So that will look fantastic when it's finished. I actually thought it was finished. It looked pretty much finished, but if you're nearly there, that'll look great. And the Ecto 1, brilliant time with Ghostbusters as well. And our socials are going across the bottom of the screen right now. As I mentioned, we've just gone through it. We've got a lot of stuff, guys. And this, expect this spiel at the end of every single video. We've got a lot of content coming out. Easiest way to keep track of it all, because we have a hard time of keeping track of it ourselves sometimes. Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. On there, you'll have all the times that we go live. Some of the videos can be quite sporadic as well, that we might even sprinkle in between. So give us a follow on there. Give us a subscribe, all that good stuff. That'll do it for tonight. So thank you to everyone that's tuned in and hopefully commented along as well. And until the next video, we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.